Francis, when I first began the series to think about it, I didn't have anything about miracles or revelation. I didn't want it. I just felt uncomfortable. Maybe it was my old neurophysiology training. I don't know. The more I thought about it, conversations, the more I realized that in order to properly present the full scope, the spectrum of thought on the existence of God, I really had to cover it. So I want to come to you as a leading scientist to talk about miracles. And is this something that we should have a polite conversation about between a real scientist and a former scientist? Can we talk about miracles?
Well, I think we should. I agree with you, Robert. This is an uneasy area, particularly for somebody who's trained in science. When I talk to other scientists about the fact that I am a believer, almost always one of the questions that comes up fairly quickly is, well, that's fine, but you don't believe in miracles, do you? And when I answer, well, yes, on occasion, I think that's possible, there's usually a sort of gasp of amazement, because that seems like such a violation of the scientific approach.
Or there's a silence and they start talking about the weather.
Well, yeah, that happens too, although usually we've gone there even before we get to miracles if people are going to be that uneasy. I mean, a miracle, by definition, is a violation of the natural laws, where they are suspended, and something happens that really should not have, and that you cannot explain by any other interpretation. Now, we have to be careful here, because miracles are thrown about a bit too freely in discourse these days, and sometimes by people who really believe that, oh, it's a miracle, I found that parking space, or it's a miracle, look at that flower blooming and how beautiful it is. Well, no, I can tell you what genes got turned on in order for that pigment to appear in just that color. That's not a miracle. But are there things that really do represent a suspension of the laws of nature? Certainly many belief systems require that. For me as a Christian, the resurrection of Christ in a literal sense is a very central part of my beliefs. How can I possibly agree to something like that that completely violates all the laws of biology? And I mean, what happened to the DNA and the cellular organelles in order to make that possible? Again, I don't see this actually as a big of a logical problem as it's portrayed to be. The big question is, do you believe in God? And as a component of that, do you believe in a God who is at least in part outside of nature? And then do you believe in a God who is still active in modern times? If you're willing to say yes, yes, and yes, then the idea that
it's a short jump to miracles.
It's a very short jump. In fact, it's almost a disappointment if you don't take that jump. If God is active, why wouldn't he at times choose to send us a message by suspending laws in a way that was supposed to convey something really important? Getting there is not a problem for me. It's those first three questions that people get hung up. Now, admittedly, this whole concept of miracles troubles scientists if you go at this from the perspective that natural laws are inviolate. And that's what we assume when we go about our daily business of trying to figure out how they work. And so my prior for a miracle, in a Bayesian sense, is very, very low.
But not zero.
Zero. That's the point. If you're absolutely unwilling to accept them, you have made an assumption, and your argument has become circular, that they cannot happen. And I think that's probably not a good place for a scientist to be in any particular discourse, including this one.
Critics would say that if you look at the reported miracles in major religions, they are very heavily skewed to long time ago when there are questionable historical records, and as you bring them more current and you look at any claims, they all fall apart.
So I agree. There's certainly a question here about how much veracity can be attached to things that were described that happened a long time ago when there were no scientific instruments present at the time. If the Earth supposedly stopped turning in order for the sun to stand still during this battle, was that something that anybody could verify? No, we don't have the ability to do that. And certainly you could make the counter argument, though, that miracles don't happen randomly. If God is basically at some purpose by allowing or causing such miracles to occur, it is because he's trying to send a message. And perhaps there were times during the course of history where those messages were particularly needed and therefore that's when they happen. And if we weren't living at one of those ganglions of history, that we shouldn't expect, therefore, to see miracles happening around us at the moment.
I would certainly think today is a ganglion of history, but maybe everybody feels that way in every
Right,
era.
we don't have a sort of personal comparison to make of what it was like to live.
If
in,
I'm here, it
sort
has
of-
to be a ganglion.
Exactly, by definition. Our tendency is always to assume that our time is the most important.